This is Olivia, I was going to read the wrong surname there, Olivia Ragone. Yep, from the National Trust. I think it's fantastic that we've been able to get you to speak, get you up here. But I'll let you explain what the National Trust is and why it cares about maps. And then I think we'll have some time for some questions with you afterwards.
Hello everybody, I'm Olivia. I've been working for the National Trust for about 4 years as a GIS data officer, but normally I spend most of my time outdoors, so forgive me, I'm not the most comfortable in this environment, but yeah. So I thought I'd start firstly by saying thank you for your organisation, Gregory, and for answering all my questions before I've arrived here. But for those of you that are perhaps from overseas or don't know too much about the National Trust, we are Europe's largest conservation charity. We operate in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and we're a membership-based organisation. So we have, I think it's 500 to 600 sites, sort of varies across the year as we acquire new land and dispose of new land. But those properties sort of function independently, and we also have our central team. Across the organisation, we're supported by, I think there you can see, 5.3 million members and a huge volunteer base as well. So they vary in the tasks that they complete. So there's plenty of sort of conservation type volunteer roles, but we also have people who are out walking the trails quite often. And that sort of plays into the project that we're going to talk about. So earlier this year, we released our new 10-year strategy. So this strategy is quite important to us. It's sort of moving us more into the current climate that we're in, with climate change being quite an important thing for us. The strategy was formed through various discussions with students, with members of the AGM board, and also with some of our internal staff members sort of feeding into those surveys. And the core things that came out of that were 3 key pillars. So by 2050, we want to end unequal access to nature, we want to inspire millions and restore nature. So these are quite broad statements, but end unequal access to nature is really quite a significant one for the project that we're doing, which I will move on to now. But it's all about sort of getting people out to our properties, engaging with what we have, and also sort of connecting and getting the mental health benefits. We know that if people aren't at our sites, they won't act to sort of help with climate change. So that moves me on to the Paths and Trails programme. So the programme itself is largely funded by Cotswold Outdoors, but it's been supported through sort of applications with Sport England. But the overall aim is to help provide clearly mapped quality path networks along with our trails to provide public benefit and inspire people to get out there. The programme itself is divided into 5 key work streams. So you can see over on the left-hand side, we've got create and maintain. This work stream is largely about what our ranger teams do when they're on the ground and they decide they want to create a new trail at one of our sites. How do they go about doing it? What materials do they use? How do we do it consistently? We then have the waymarking and grading work stream, which is all about understanding what attributes do we need to know about to describe outdoor access. So developing sort of a consistent and universal language there. The next work stream that we've got is more about signage. So when you're out on your countryside estate and you're sort of further away from our core visitor experience by the cafe and all the rest, how do you know that you're following the right track? Are there signs there? Do you feel confident? The next work stream then is more about our digital products. So at the moment we've got the website and we also have an app. The app is quite old. We'd really quite like to decommission it and replace it with something a bit better. But essentially it's how do we provide information and how do we get more audiences accessing that? And then lastly there we've got understanding the asset, which is a sort of fancy way of saying this is the data that supports all of those work streams. So this is where we're coming into the GIS side of things. So what we've got at the moment, this is a screenshot from our website, but essentially we have an example here of our web page. It comprises of these static PDF maps that are quite often outdated, they're inconsistent across a lot of our properties, they're not as good as we would like them to be, and there's quite limited access information there as well. So our visitors don't really know much about what access permissions we've got on our land, and our property teams also didn't previously have a core data set that they could use to do their inspections on their paths. Also, you can see on the left-hand side, we've got various filters. So when you're actually coming to the National Trust website, how do you actually find the trail that you want? The only real filtering we've got at the moment is largely about where you can go. And actually, if you look at them, we've got regions like Bath, and then we've got whole countries like Northern Ireland. So there's a lot of work that we can do there to improve how visitors are actually finding our trails. This here is a slide that we shared at a previous State of the Map conference. So it just highlights the overall ambition that we have on the programme. So starting from the bottom, we wanted to create a knowledge base, a core data set with geometry and basic access information attached to our path network. Moving up the pyramid, we then wanted to use that data and provide it to our properties in a way that they can help manage their assets. So we're thinking maintenance budgets, investment, how we can do our inspections on the ground on our compliance tasks. And then again, moving up the pyramid, we're looking at how can we engage our visitors using digital tools on those curated outdoor visitor experiences. So as part of that, we want to look at sharing openly. We need to have download scripts and monitoring tools to sort of help us maintain that data. So that brings us on to phase 1 of the project, which happened in around 2022. So we wanted to capture our statutory and permissive paths. We needed some form of mastering the data in an open source platform. We wanted a schema to establish a tagging standard, and we needed to monitor that data for changes in the path network. And really, as a big part of that, we wanted to utilise the crowd to sort of draw on their expertise and help us with the data maintenance. So, why did we choose OpenStreetMap to help capture our path network? Well, there was a solid baseline already there in our map. I think Walkwheel Cycle Trust, who were formerly Sustrans, did a similar project, and it took them about 3 years to capture their data. It took us 6 months using OpenStreetMap. The other things were sort of more around what is actually reflected on the ground. So OpenStreetMap includes those desire lines and the path network that isn't necessarily the rights of way. We also were able to add real-time updates. So if we had storm damage from ash dieback and trees had fallen into our paths, we were able to close them and serve that data out real-time. The actual platform itself was pretty user-friendly, so it helped us with our delivery times on the project. We were able to train our staff, both the mapping team as well as our property teams, rangers, with actually capturing that data and maintaining it. And also we knew that the OpenStreetMap community would be a great resource to help us maintain that data. However, there was some concern, particularly from our ranger teams, just around the data being made publicly available. Means that they can edit our data. So we did do a bit of testing, and we found that actually after 6 months, 18 of our properties only had 34 counter edits made by the public, and most of them were sort of minor changes where people had moved paths backwards and forwards around trees or that kind of thing. So actually we decided that we weren't particularly concerned in that sense. So once we captured our path network into OpenStreetMap, you can see an example of where we've downloaded it there. So we designed a bespoke Python script, and that data is captured and downloaded on a monthly basis and put into our National Trust GIS browser, which is available for all of our National Trust staff. Once we had downloaded the data, we then looked to identify changes. So we ran a script that would sort of identify those differences. And if there was a change, we then notified our ranger teams via an automated email. So they could go into their emails, they could see that, click on a link, it would take them through to the GIS browser, and at the bottom there you can see an example of a path that had changed in the last month. The other bits that we sort of know about as well are that the property team are flagging to us where we've got new acquisitions and disposals, so that's where we need to go back in and make sure we've got the path network captured. The thing to say about this, though, is that the monitoring tool is only as good as the people that are using it. So some of our property teams are really quite stretched for capacity, So we know that not all of our properties are going to be maintained quite as well as we want. So this is where we're sort of welcoming support from the OpenStreetMap community to sort of help us with any real-time issues that are happening on the ground. So if you know or you live near to a landslide or a closure of a path, we'd really benefit from you guys adding into the OpenStreetMap dataset to say so. So after phase 1 of the data capture, specifically on the paths, we ended up with a data set of our location and access information. It's about 13,000 kilometres worth of path in there. We then had the monitoring tool, which flagged to OpenStreetMap users, flagged changes in OpenStreetMap to our property teams, issues of sort of data maintenance and quality. The next thing we wanted to do then was actually move into path inspections for our property teams. So we deployed an app. So this is Arc Field Maps. We've created an app of our own in there. So it's called Paths and Outdoor Furniture, and we use it by downloading our data. We put it into that app, and that forms the basis of our path inspections. So ranger teams can go out in the field and they can record their inspections against that data. In the last year, we had about 6,500 inspection records, and we expect that to increase over time as people are sort of getting on board with the tools. So there were a couple of examples where there was a level of subjectivity in our mapping. So this is a good example that we had up in the Peak District. We had a path that was sort of on peatland, and it was causing damage to that peatland as people were walking over it. Rangers were initially quite keen to delete the path in OpenStreetMap, largely because they felt that it was causing the damage. But we knew that as it was on Crow land, we couldn't actually dissuade access because people have the legal right to be there. And also it might get remapped if there is evidence of it still there. So we sought some advice, we had the data working group, and we explained why that we decided to discourage the use of the path without deleting it in OpenStreetMap through change set comments and descriptions. We also have days with our team to ensure consistency in our mapping. So at the moment, we've got a different member of our mapping team based in each region, and it's quite important for us that we're all being consistent with how we're actually putting that data into OpenStreetMap. So we'll get some niche scenarios and we'll get together and we'll have a look at what it is that we're mapping and how each of us would approach it so that we're following the same methods. We've also offered some opportunities for feedback. So our tagging schemas are all on our Wikipedia page there, so you can go and have a look and see what it is exactly that we're mapping. And we've also had some conversations with the likes of Robert and Jez in the room, who've sort of helped us with some fairly niche scenarios and been checking our schemas before we've actually gone out mapping. So that brings us on to phase 2. So this is looking at the trail network as opposed to the ways, the path segments themselves. So similar in setup, we're looking to capture those curated routes in an open source platform. We need schemas and we want to draw on the crowd, and we need a monitoring tool to help us maintain that data. We're then looking at sharing that, how we're going to go about doing that. And we need a route specification that will help us get our OpenStreetMap data into all of the various apps and platforms that are out there for route navigation. So once we had mapped our trail network, similarly to before, we have our sort of locations of our trails and the core information that we think is important for those walking our routes. A lot of these attributes are physical attributes, so things like surfaces, smoothness, widths, heights, any barriers, that kind of thing, as we get out and about on site. We again have our monitoring tool, and that's sort of helping us to maintain that data. We haven't yet finished capturing all of our trails. We're focusing on promoted walking trails for the time being, but we will move into cycling at a later date. We're expecting to run this phase of the project until the end of January next year. At the moment, we have about 750 trails. We're anticipating we'll probably get to about 900 by the end of the project. As we're out capturing our trails, we're also looking at the information that we're providing on our information boards, as well as our website and leaflets and so on. So it's been an opportunity for us to actually standardise the promoted material that we have as we're going out and about. Once we've captured the data, we're also looking to improve that filtering that you saw on the website at the start and actually help us modernise the map element of the web page as well. Just got an example here, so I'm just going to run a quick demo to show you some examples of what we've done in OpenStreetMap. In the OpenStreetMap ID editor, you should be able to see some of the work that our team have done on the Paths and Trails project. During the first phase of data capture, we captured the location and access permissions of all paths on National Trust land. In this case, I'm at a site called Marley Common, which is part of the Blackdown property group. If I click on a path, you should be able to see down the left-hand side of the screen the access permissions associated with it. On foot, by motor vehicle, bicycle, and horse, and if there are any designations attached to it, it should be tagged as such. In this case, you'll see we've got a public bridleway. Coming over to our GIS browser, which is available for all National Trust employees to use, you can see the outline of our property boundaries in pink. I'm going to switch to a grayscale base map for ease. I'm also going to switch on our paths inventory. This is the OpenStreetMap data clipped to anything that intersects National Trust land. Having now zoomed in to our area of interest, you can see our example from earlier. If I click on the path, in the results details, you'll see down the left-hand side of the screen the same tags that are visible in OpenStreetMap. Having our path network visible in the GIS browser allows our property teams to create maps as they need. Moving on into the next round of data capture, we are now looking at an example of one of our National Trust trails as publicised on our website. You can see the trail name, the description, start point, duration, distance, dog access, and so on. If you scroll further, there are also step-by-step instructions for the route and a map. So this brings us up to speed with where we're at with the project now, looking to represent our trail network into OpenStreetMap. As you can see, we've added up all of the ways, amenities, barriers, and attractions that form part of the visitor experience. We've used the relation tool in OpenStreetMap to capture this. Down the left-hand side of the screen, you can also see the attributes associated with this relation. You can see the feature type, name, a few optional tags around network class and network type, the operator, start and end points, descriptions, distances, whether or not it forms a round trip or a circular walk, website URLs, and a few additional bits around dog access and tourism features, as well as colours of the route. The vast majority of the attributes associated with this trail will be coming from our website information in the first instance. Once captured, our team have been going to visit the site to capture the physical attributes that we can't get from behind a desk. The types of attributes we've been capturing include things like surface type, smoothness, narrowest widths, heights, and step counts. As an example, over at Hazelmere Common, we can see that this relation has a gate, boardwalk, and bench associated with it. Clicking on the gate, I can see that the material and narrowest width has been captured. Clicking on all ways, you should have a surface and a smoothness associated with it. In this case, we've also recorded a step count, a narrowest width, and a height. The bench also has a material, backrest, and armrest captured. This data has been captured in an app called Vespucci, as it gave us most editing control over some of the other OpenStreetMap editing apps that we saw out there. Going back to our GIS browser, you can see we have also downloaded the trail network. Clicking on an example of one of our trails, you can see down the left-hand side panel of our screen all of the associated tags that you see in OpenStreetMap. Okay, I think that's it for that one. So just to say, we aren't expecting to solve all information about access at the moment. We do have a couple of sort of descriptors about the physical attributes of our trails, but we know that there's more work to be done in that space. We did consider about, I think it was 256 different attributes that we were potentially going to add to the trail network. But of course, we've got sort of limited timescales for our project. So we've had to decide on what we think are the priority attributes for the time being, and there may be future data capture phases to add to that. So what's next on the project? The idea really is to actually provide our trails in a format that outdoor users can put in whatever app that they choose. As part of sort of serving this to our visitors, we have a few bits to work on. So particularly around engaging our volunteers in that data maintenance. How can we increase the data on the areas that we need it? So a lot of our trails go off National Trust land, so there are bits that we are missing in our data sets. So we'd like to draw on the OpenStreetMap community. We also have National Trust walk volunteers, so a lot of the time these are people that want to walk with a purpose, and so we can give them sort of tasks that we need doing as part of that. We also need to do a bit of work on enhancing our digital trail offer. So one option that we had was that we could choose a specific partner organisation to help us provide that data in a way that is sort of more modern. The alternative choice that we had was actually to give that data out and allow the supply chain to innovate that on their own. And then lastly here, we want to present our data in a way that is consistent. So for us, that's about engaging other organisations in potentially a working group or to complete sort of similar projects that would help us sort of have a greater scope for what it is that we want to do. So we have had some interest from particularly the Wildlife Trust, but also the Forestry Commission and other local authorities that are quite interested in running similar projects. But we do need to do a bit of work to develop a bit of a universal language before we serve that out. So does it work for the Lake District as well as some of our urban properties as well? So we're inviting a bit of dialogue there for representatives who are willing to talk with us around language, particularly on some of the values that are more subjective, so things like smoothness of a trail and the icons that are currently missing from the OpenStreetMap dataset. And then lastly, we want to know if there are other schemas out there for sharing open data. So we've got one here, which is an example that Sport England helped us sort of guide us and produce. It's the Open Data Institute's route specification. There is a link to it there which you can go and have a look at. But the thing to note is that it hasn't been looked at since 2019. So again, it needs a bit of work before we actually let that data be shared and sort of give it to our supply chain to innovate. I think that is pretty much everything. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now, or there's an email that you can drop us if you need.
Thank you, Olivia. And we do have some time for questions. I've got another mic down here, so I'm going to give this to Chris to do the running if anyone has some questions, because I've been going up and down there for stairs. Yeah, just there. The button on the bottom, hold it down. And there's one right at the back. Start at the back and you can work your way down. Thank you for your talk, Olivia, though. That was it.
Thanks.
Yeah, it should just be a quick one. Do you know if there's any thing with National Trust of Scotland going on?
National Trust of Scotland is actually an entirely separate organisation, so unfortunately not, no.
I might go for one on this side and then switch over.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the Ramblers of Scotland are doing some similar work, but yeah, I'm not sure about the National Trust for Scotland.
So thanks for your talk and presentation. I would like to ask if I see that you do the demo with the editor. I think that is due to the fact that most of people are new, but do you talk about using JOSM and maybe some presets and some styles? We do some experience in Italy for mapping accessibility, and we helped a lot of the users to have a dedicated visualization that can easily identify if something is changed and maybe with some colors and something like that. And some kind of experience could be also, you talk about mapping. In Italy, we have the experience with the Alpine Club that is mapping in OSM, and this can be some experience that can be useful to compare there.
Yeah, definitely. I think JOSM we have touched on a little bit, particularly around the data maintenance, because it's sort of easier to do mass editing in JOSM. So we have done a bit, but for purposes of our Ranger teams, which aren't always the tech-savvy audience, yeah, we have stuck with the OpenStreetMap editor. But we'd love to hear about sort of better solutions. If you think that there are some, come and find me. I'd love to hear.
Thanks, Olivia, for a really interesting presentation there. The two organisations I would associate with mapping rural England are, well, yourselves, clearly, but also the Ordnance Survey. And I wondered, you used the Ordnance Survey maps as backdrop maps there, but I wondered if you've been in discussions with them, and how far the mapping of your trails falls into some of their own statutory or other responsibilities? Thanks.
Yeah, so we did connect with Ordnance Survey. As you may or may not know, Ordnance Survey don't always include their permissive path network, and so that's partly why we opted to do our own data set in OpenStreetMap. So Ordnance Survey are quite interested in the work that we're doing, and they'd actually quite like some of our data. So we are quite happy to share it with them, and yeah, so there is work and a bit of a partnership going on there.
The top, and then I think we'll go over to the second
Great.
Sorry, do I press the button? No, just talk.
Great talk. Talking about Ordnance Survey reminded me when I was in the Lake District and I was using OpenStreetMap, and it was great, but then we were at the top of this peak and we were trying to work out where to go next. These hikers are going, why aren't you using Ordnance Survey? So I guess the question is, it's great that you're getting those routes in there, and obviously they're going to be in downstream things. How do you kind of get that trust that people have with OpenStreetMap data, I guess, because you've had the stories about people going down wrong paths and whatnot?
It's a good question. I think the Lake District is an interesting example. You tend to get more of a sort of experienced audience in the Lake District. So they're not always people that are following apps with sort of turn-by-turn route navigation and so on. So it's an interesting example. But we are looking to sort of do some work with companies like Strava and All Trails as well, so that we can sort of promote our data set that way and capture some of that younger audience in particular.
To the side.
Thank you. Following on from the other questions about Ordnance Survey, a lot of the ultimate end users will be very familiar with Ordnance Survey products, won't realise there's any alternatives. How are you navigating sort of the licensing aspect of then how you share your routes with the kind of temptation to overlay that with Ordnance Survey products?
It's a good question. It's something that we'll come on to in the next phase of the project, really, is the sort of how we can actually get that out there. So I probably don't have any immediate answers for you on that one, I'm afraid. But yeah, we are, like I say, we're looking to sort of work with some of those other organisations that are presenting data, particularly for sort of walking, running, cycling and so on. And we're hoping that we can get a bit of a partnership going and use their audience as well to sort of help with sharing that data. Sorry if that doesn't fully answer your question.
Two rows back, and then jump to the next question. We'll go with you, and then we'll end. But I think Olivia is around for the
Yeah, I was wondering, is there like a big mismatch between what the OSM schema, like the current trail schema, allows you to communicate and what you would like to communicate in the ideal case about your trails? And have you started thinking about like helping to shape the schema that we use in OSM?
Yeah, definitely. The best example I have of that is the smoothness tag, I guess. So the values at the moment are good, bad, horrible, and so on. So they're a little bit subjective in that sense. The definitions that are attached to them are much more objective. So it will say something like -2 centimetre cracks or so on. So we actually quite like the definitions there, but it's the values themselves that we would like to sort of start to shape and use that to improve the way that it's working currently in OpenStreetMap. But yeah, there are lots of tags out there that have been really useful and much less subjective, I would say.
So one more talk.
With the license, I just looked at your website and I looked at a few of the maps, and they all say Crown copyright, and they don't say OpenStreetMap copyright on it. And so, if other,
yeah,
what is happening there?
The ones that are on the website at the moment are all done using the Ordnance Survey base map. We then draw over the top of it using just a simple workflow. So at the moment, we're not sharing anything via OpenStreetMap on our website. So it's all going into OpenStreetMap, but the eventual goal is to update the website so that it reflects OpenStreetMap instead of Ordnance Survey, potentially. We'll see. Potentially.